happiness
Absolutely.
on a very philosophical way, and there's, because we hear about enhancing and using it and trying to use it to its best, but there is, I suppose, a downside as well, and just the case study, or whatever you want to call it, this week of the school in Kerry banning the mobile phones, and the students actually being happier, so I don't know if there's. It just struck me as you're talking about happiness and technology. And
but you are so right, and I think this is a way that the lessons we have to learn, because we like to think we have all the answers about everything. Yeah. We're actually making it up as we go along in this thing. We really are. Yeah. Whether it be in the classroom, how we're teaching, whether it be in terms of how good or how useful technology is or isn't. Yeah. And actually, we're not used to that. We are the ones who are being challenged and putting out of our comfort zone. Frances said to me once, she's resolved to do something that scares her every day. I mean, we are being scared every day by this stuff, and a lot of people, the reaction is just shut it down, I don't want it. And in fact, when you survey staff, they say actually technology really doesn't have any use in the classroom, but that's fair enough. A lot of people can teach like that, but I mean, ultimately, this has changed the world entirely. And I mean, if we ignore it like this, then I don't think we're going anywhere.
Trying to find the ground that is most
absolutely, absolutely, and we're still just trying to find it. We're discovering, I think.
That's great. Okay, we're going to return to that later. So our next speaker is Dr. Rachel O'Connor from Campus Life.
So, I'm probably going to jump on those philosophical questions because I, in the previous life of student services, spent a long time looking at the X and Y generation. And coming from a student perspective, we spend a lot of time engaging with parents, and I know there's conversations here about parents today as well. And I've actually controversially started doing year-end IT Parents Information Evenings over the last number of years to try and help parents to kind of stand back and allow their children to jump off the edge and be in a safe space to fail. But I suppose what I wanted to throw out for the conversation today is that our children are products of the X and Y generation, that angst-ridden generation. And are we putting all of our, and I'm part of the XY generation, are we putting all of our angst into that XY generation and labelling them? And if there's one thing Generation Z doesn't want to be, it's labelled. They want to have the identity, the fluid identity that they want to find for themselves, and they don't want to be labelled. So as higher educationists, how do we manage or provide an individual narrative for these students, because it's the narrative that they want. They don't want a pre-prescribed story, and they're going to live their life in episodes and chapters, not in the sequencing that we would have done. So it's how we come to terms, as Kevin said, with the fluidity, because fluidity isn't something that we're necessarily comfortable with. I also think the XY generation had to come through the recession, through the bubble, and all of this new generation in Z that are coming in absorbed all of that. And I think I have great optimism in that, and I apologise now to any millennials in the room, in that the bubble of the millennials has definitely burst, and what we see with Generation Z is a real opportunity here as educationalists to take back this new community of youth who has an abundance for has a political appetite again, and they have an investment in their education again, they have an investment in their narrative, and they want us not to tell them, not to necessarily show them because they've seen, but they want us to mentor them, and they want to absorb from us, from our experience, because this is for what I would consider the era of the experiential learner. They want to learn by doing, by experiencing, by being, and they're maybe not as afraid of failure as we are, and maybe we as the educators, as the mentors, as the parents need to step back and have a look at maybe it's us that's very afraid of failure and maybe it's not them.
That's very good. Any points for Rachel or comments or questions? There's a lot of talk about parents there.
Yeah, I was interested in your parent meetings. How do they go?
Yeah, they're oversubscribed absolutely every year, and I think there's a lot of value in showing the parents that the contract is with this new young individual and this is who we're going to be talking to, but giving them the reassurance, because I think there is, when we talk about parenting into the 30s or 40s, that probably is true because the parent-child relationship has changed. But I suppose what we're trying to do is maybe take the best of what the boomers and the baby boomers did, in that they defined a point at which you're okay to go, and if you fail, that's okay, we're always here, but you have to kind of stand alone at some point. So I suppose those parents' information evenings are about giving the confidence to parents to say, this is the safest space. There's no safe space to fail, but this is, if you're going to give them a place to fail, to experiment, to do things, then this is the place for them to do it, and they have the supports and the opportunities and I suppose the position in life where they can take those risks and fail and move on, and that failure is actually a huge part of succeeding. So I think that's very much the direction that we've taken with the parents' evenings, and even at the open days now, while their kids go off and see, and I use that word kids because at this time they're 16, 17 and 18, and that's how the parents view them. We see them as young adults, but that's how the parents view them, and I think it's all about understanding the context of the different groups that you're engaging with. So while the students who are coming to us go off and see what they're going to be looking at, we kind of try and herd the parents into us to say, let them go, let them explore, don't be standing, don't be the shadow, you know, be the advisor.
So it's back to that point made earlier on, I think, a few speakers about resilience again.
Yeah. And I think what the boomers, and I come from a sociologist background, what the boomers did right was that they put a defining line as to almost like, well, you're an adult now. Do you know what I mean? I mean, how many parents have conversations with their children now saying, well, you've made a mistake, but you're an adult now, you're going to have to live with it. You know, those sort of conversations. And was there anything wrong with having those conversations? You know, why have they all been wiped out? And I think it's because of X and Y's necessity to be competitive parents. I don't know whether we want to be parents or friends anymore, and that's always the question. And, you know, there is this kind of competitiveness to do everything right that Generation X and Generation Y did. We were, you know, the golden age, had every opportunity, the most educated, and the most information. But that means living in a very risk-orientated society, and the more risk-orientated society you are, the more you want to protect the things that mean the most to you. So, naturally.
I'm just going to make a point of that, and I think it's wonderful to bring the parents into this. I wholly agree with what you're saying, and I think it's absolutely essential because we have an increased number of students, parents contacting us, parents wanting to be involved. And that, I've been teaching DIT for over 20 years now, and again, in the last number of years, it's really sort of rocketed in some ways. But unfortunately, I don't mean to sound like a cliche, but I do also blame the media too, and I mean a certain type of media. That sort of, the parents, you know, they have this expectation. They're told that they are to have this expectation. And also then there's this fear factor as well. And I've had a conversation with a parent only a month ago, 2 months ago. She wouldn't let her daughter go away. You know, the daughter was 19. She came into the college to try and stop her daughter from going away that weekend with her friends because she was afraid of what might happen. You know, and again, I had to remain very objective on this. I sat with her, but, you know, trying to explain to her now, she's 19, contract is with us, you know, and it was quite scary, to be honest with you, to see how parents don't want their kids to grow up sometimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and like we've all been that 18 or 19-year-old who has been kind of afraid to make that step, and actually what you need a parent to say is,
off you go.
Go.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll be fine, something might happen, it's not the end of the world, but I think as parents we're nearly afraid that we'll be judged for not.
And that's, to me, is the media.
It's the parental judgment, it's us being judged as parents, or that generation being judged as parents, I think is the real issue.
Yeah.
I don't think the children have just absorbed that over the last 20 years, and we as educators have to somehow, I don't know, chemical term, but we have to, you know, through osmosis, take some of that angst, anxiety away and give them the space to fail and fail badly and go on and be successful.
Very good. Sorry, and there's a Philip Larkin, there's a poet, Philip Larkin, there's a phrase, a line coming through my head. Kevin, as an educated man, would you like to say?
I can't read your mind, Brian.
Do you know what I'm talking about? They fuck you up, your mum and dad.
Like your mum and dad.
Yeah.
They do what they do.
Yeah, they don't really do what they do. So as all parents in the room, I think we can take comfort from that. Okay, moving on from that. Pierre. Yes, it's Pierre Yimbog, our incoming president of the Students' Union.
Okay then, so I guess me standing up here, I should probably have the answers from Generation Z. Considering I was born in 1995, I should know everything about technology. I have my phone, I have 10 other tablets and things like that. I'm constantly on social media and things like that, but unfortunately, in myself, I don't have the answers. I think we'll probably find out, like most of us really don't have the answers, but there's ways maybe we can manage that or mitigate that. But what I'm going to focus on is like the factors that probably affect students, most of all being on the inside and then being on the outside. So being on the inside is being within the institution, the environment that they're in, that we have to manage as we go back to students for success in trying to make sure that students have the best learning experience, best student experience it can be. So whether it be, we know like students have all sorts of devices now, whether it be mobile phones or computers and things like that. So how do you best use that? Because they're living with it 9 to 5 or whatever, 24/7 most of their life. So how do you manage that within being in the inside, being in the institution itself? So that goes back to making sure there's good Wi-Fi, good infrastructure is there in terms of the use of technology. We always complain maybe in DIT we use web courses and kind of the virtual learning environment to make sure they're better able to assist in their education. But mostly we need to probably put our everything that we do, put our technology head on us. Where we think about how do we change something around the curriculum or something like that. How do we change around assessments and exams? So it always brings me back to times like when I was back in school, had to learn your times tables, but the time you spend learning them all the time, you could just click them into a calculator and figure it out in like 2 seconds. So you have to change in terms of what are we teaching students if it's actually practical when they go out into the real world and when you have technology there to assist you better. But even speaking on the real world, the pressures that students are under in terms of society pressure, in terms of how they should look and how they should be from social media, in terms of who they should be as a person, need to try and find their own identity, but there's pressures there in society, what they should be or what they should be like. And also the other pressures in terms of financial pressures, to going back in terms of, the around accommodation. I feel like students nowadays, they'd rather go and starve than rather lose their phone, because their phone is a way to distract them from the outside world in terms of having 10 assignments to do, or your rent is due, you have to pay your fees and things like that. But if they just immerse themselves in their mobile phones for days, they'll forget about everything and they'll try and find some comfort in that area. So I'm sure we have to try and balance that in terms of realising what's the issues, and I'll go back around the fake news, around things like the ways. Sometimes social media, I see they're directed to one point of view in terms of we want to give them the overall experience, give them a better picture of what the world is like, but sometimes social media doesn't help that, where whether your friends or your circle only have some kind of point of view, so you're therefore not seeing the other side, or you're not seeing the wider picture. So it's trying to balance that within the institution, because students are using technology in many different ways, and it can have a bad effect also in terms of it can be good things, but also it can be bad also, so you have to try and manage that. But I'm not sure if we have the answers for it, or how we can have practical answers around the infrastructure invested in that, while the other things we have to try our best to mitigate that, whereby provide supports around counselling, rather training in terms of how to better use technology to better assist you and not use it for you waste your time during the day. So I'm not sure, maybe we'll have the answers today or maybe not. So, but thank you anyway.
And any points or questions?
I have a question, I suppose, and it's around when I was a student, that was a long time ago, I had the luxury of, that was what my primary goal was when I was in college. For the Z generation and for yourself, a lot of students work now, they have to work because of the cost, etc.
Yeah.
Do you think that is a benefit to you in your education or a disadvantage? And if it's a disadvantage, do you think technology, e-learning, whatever, how do we bridge that gap? Because it's not the same, and it's a huge change to what I know for when I went to college, because you have more things, you have, a lot of students, not maybe you personally, a lot of students, they have to work.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I think the gone generations past, I'm sure everybody had to work at some stage when they were in school in order to assist them so they can have some kind of social life or to pay for their fees or things like that. But I don't think the institute itself has managed that, because a lot of students are still stuck with 9 to 6 college days, or they still have to do their 40 hours a week or assessments and things like that. So the institution itself hasn't caught on, and the education system hasn't caught on also. That you don't need to be in class 9 to 5 every day to get your education. If you do half of that, and the other half also being practical, not just around the theory, and the other half is you getting your experience, so either provide you with working a part-time job, or provide you work experience or a kind of internship that is paid, so that you get both sides, so that, or whether working within the institute itself also, so you're not losing out on your education. So it is kind of hard trying to manage it, because it is important that you're using your technology, but also it can be difficult if you're stuck having to work also at the same time and trying to get an education. But the ways, the policies or the infrastructure or the structures within the institutes don't allow you to do that, because you have to go to your 40 hours a week lecture, but at the same time you need, in order for you to do that, you need to work also. And it's just maybe it's just a conversation we can start in terms of like how do we create our curriculum as you know, is like a 4-year degree. Is it just defined and doing your 240 credits, and from that it's whatever, I'm not sure how it's calculated in terms of how many 100 hours of lecture times or contact hours that you need. Do we need to revise that? It's like, oh no, we don't need 100 hours. Okay, 50 hours will do enough. And their own self-learning through technology can do that also. And then the other % around work experience. That even if they're working a part-time job, they're still getting experience. Because I'm sure it's a lot harder when you're in college all the time and you're just doing your books, and then when you get out to the real world, if you don't do like some kind of part-time job, you're not used to doing teamwork, dealing with conflict in the workplace or things like that, so you're still getting some kind of education if you're doing a part-time job, so you have to try to put those two together, I guess.
Thank you. We were just talking about at lunch actually with Tom and Jason David about the fact that should students be working, because we had full-time students, but really our full-time students are part-time students now, because they have this heavy workload and they're skipping presentations if they have to go to work, because if they lose their job they can't pay accommodation. So it's a bit of a vicious circle for them. But the point was made that it's actually teaching them how to spin plates, and there's valuable learning there in juggling higher education and a job. Just so unless the job takes over and they end up dropping out of higher education, but that there is a lot of valuable learning there. Because I would have been of the opinion, no, concentrate on your studies, then go get your job. But my view was turned yesterday, so it's interesting.
Very good. That's great. Thanks for that, Pierre. You're getting rounds of applause. And I am struck just on the students working that obviously when I was in college, it was 20% of people went to college, and no matter what we said about being poor students, we were the elite, and then you couldn't work because there was no jobs, so you were a full-time student. But now our students are coming from a much more diverse kind of socio-economic range, and a lot of them do have to work, and there are jobs out there, so we need to be more flexible like that. Now, David.
Yes. All right.
Yep.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone. Just as an aside before I get started, I want to thank everybody, particularly Jen and Francis, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. We have a lot of visitors to Ireland, partly because DIT is a partnership with our university, and everybody that I've met says just rave. They're so friendly, they're so wonderful and so welcoming, and I'm a skeptic, and I said they will never live up to it. I was wrong on so many levels. It has been a wonderful time being here. You've been very welcoming and accommodating, and at first I thought, what can I add to this panel? And I listened to the Wednesday presentations and I said, oh, I am a skeptic of generational typing, so I will provide a response to that. And then David did a brilliant job of that on Thursday. So I said, well, I don't really need to do that, so what can I provide to this? I will say that part of the reasons why I'm a little bit skeptical of generation stereotyping is because a lot of the studies that come out of this don't have as much empiricism as historical sociological studies tend to, and they are in the moment, so they don't have that lens to be able to focus. But it's also partly because they make certain conclusions that then are taken out of context and repeated. Like the attention span statistic that we heard was actually taken from a study of a psychologist who was working with students in 1995 who had ADD. So of course, they are going to be diagnosed as having shorter attention spans. Then he repeated the study and said, oh, it's gone from 12 seconds to 8 seconds. So now everybody in 1995 born in 1995 or was around in 1995, has an attention span of 12 to 8 seconds. And it's these broad applicabilities that I have some issues with. So what can I put forward? Well, I think I can put forward a couple things. One, I can put forward our experience that we have at Purdue with course transformation and engaging with students. I can put in a little bit of the American context, and based on conversations that I've had over the last few days, I will go ahead and bracket and apologize to all of you for the 2016 US electorate. I know it has significant negative consequences for you. I hope those are as small as possible and those over soon. But we, in the United States, we have a context where a lot of these studies that are made in generational stereotypings come from dominant voices. And I think that's something that's been repeated maybe once or twice over the last few days. That even the images that I saw on Monday, those were overwhelmingly urban. Those were urban images, which leaves out 3 million Irish people and 1.4 million people living in the countryside. So those people are simply gone from the message of what makes Generation Z. So if we're looking at that message, who is giving it? In the United States, this is even more of a problem because we have a much more heterogeneous society, but it's also much more organizationally racist and sexist and structurally oppressive towards certain groups, and those groups are completely white. So when we have statements of Generation Z in the US, which then sometimes inform the narrative of what Generation Z is over here, it's white, cisgender, wealthy, urban males who are predominantly giving the voice to what makes up that generation. And then, when scholars hear, well, this is how the generation is, subconsciously their bias comes in and they say, well, these are the ones who are going to succeed, their needs, I'm going to address their needs. I'm just going to gravitate towards them. So it has problems with equity, it has problems with how we look at our students. But let me give you Purdue's example. So we have been working on a course transformation project over the last 7 years. We've dealt with 300 different instructors, we've transformed 450 courses, and we've done this to make them student-centered and more collaborative. And we have active learning spaces and a whole kind of institutional program to support this. We've done that with a theoretical framework. And the reason we do that with a theoretical framework is because people come up to us and ask us, how do I make my class student-centered and active? And we say, I don't know, but the theory has an idea. So here's how you do it. So the theory is a theory called self-determination theory. And I think it aligns with a lot of what we've been talking about over the last few days. You can find it on selfdeterminationtheory.org. It is all there. The best part about this theory is that it's got 40 years of research across a wide array of disciplines and work environments. And it is based on essential happiness and basic psychological needs. And it posits that if we have 3 things satisfied, we will be happier. If we feel a sense of autonomy, a sense of competence, and a sense of relatedness, we will do better. So we've looked at this theory, and that's structured how we've talked to instructors to think about their courses. Now, autonomy doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want. It simply means you have some volition or some choice. You feel that you have some choice in what you're doing. And thinking of it generationally, I don't think this is limited just to Z. I think all of us like to have some choice, and from what I've been told, that goes doubly so with the Irish. So if it's your choice, you're all behind it. For competence, we like to feel that we are able to do what we want to do, or that we are effective at what we are doing. That connects with some of the language that we heard about students wanting consistent feedback and also being very ambitious. They want to know that they're competent and they want to be competent. And then finally, the idea of relatedness, that we are connected to each other. And this is the digital native world. This is the world that David was positing, that others were positing about everyone being connected. And connectivism is an idea that we need to think about when we're thinking of learning. But it's not simply between Zers. It's not simply student-to-student connectivity. It's also students to the content and to the teacher and instructor. And one of the things that I was struck by until today is that until 10 minutes ago, we'd only heard from one student, and that was 15 seconds when we were introducing ourselves on Wednesday. And that's not necessarily wrong, and there's all kinds of logistical reasons for that. But the thing that I would put forward to you as a challenge is, if you want to know what your Gen Z students need, what they expect in classes, what they're dealing with and what their struggles are, ask them. Not just Pierre. Ask all of them. Ask them individually, gather that information. It's real easy to do. So there are ways to do it, but I would encourage you to talk to them directly, because I think you're going to have a lot more in common than you might otherwise have with generational type. Okay, thank you.
Good. Some food for thought there. Do we have any comments or questions before we go into the full panel?
Sorry, just on that one, what's the difference then between the persuasion science, which means an act is voluntary, you buy somebody into it, you make a small commitment like the 0 to 5K running.
Yes.
It's a small initial commitment,
Yes.
which required critical thinking and effort.
Yes.
And then you can expand that very quickly because the person doesn't need critical thinking.
Yes.
Like everything there that you've said is the exact same as persuasion science.
Mm.
Like when I go into a hotel room and I see 85% of the people have reused towels.
Yes.
I immediately see that and I will perhaps more than likely do the same.
Yes.
So how's it different?
The benefit of persuasion science is that is the that is the tool that you can use when you structure your class to edge people in a certain direction.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are creating an environment at that same time that says, you do not get a towel if you don't hang yours up,
Yeah.
you don't get a towel for the rest of the time.
Mm-hmm.
That is removing autonomy. Or if you say, none of you know how to wash your towels. None of you, we're screwing things up and it's you who's doing the screwing up.
Yes,
that is
yeah.
disconnecting from the individual. So you can structure classes in a way to think, am I increasing some of their volition while trying to persuade them? Am I increasing their ability to think that they're doing the right thing as I nudge them along the path? And am I connecting them to me, to the content, and to one another while I'm doing that? Or am I persuading them to go apart and away?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Just, no, I think you made a very good point there about this sort of assuming a certain homogenous group represents a wider group. And I was just thinking back to what Emer said on the first day. She did describe a certain aspect of Generation Z, and she very much described my children. They're sons and daughters of a middle-class lecturer. They're both university graduates. One's living in Dublin, one's living in Canada. But I'm thinking of the two guys who were in my daughter's class who'd stayed in the village. They didn't go to university. They drive tractors for a living and balers. They don't have Twitter accounts. And we're not reaching out to that generation. And university might as well be on the far side of the moon for those. And I think, as you said, it's very easy. And you've made a brilliant point here, that we don't end up being an echo chamber and sort of that sort of speaking to each other and assuming that narrative of Generation Z, these confident people, there's a whole group of them who don't go to school, are not very successful. And sorry, that's what I just wanted to say.
But just on that, they are contributing to society.
Oh, absolutely.
And they will probably contribute a lot more than some people that go to college and are very selfish. Yeah, I agreed, yeah.
No,
But
but you do, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Defining success, they might actually define that as success. That might be their own success.
But
not
also,
to be a student.
but also that success to be handed to them. I mean, like the vision of the horizon was taken for granted. For those kids, you know, they were never maybe encouraged. I mean, we all know that the idea of the kids growing up in Beer Street, they can see into Trinity. They love it, but mightn't even be encouraged to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're contributing wherever they want, that's great. But for other kids, it's not what. They're handed a very powerful script.
Yeah,
Very good.
can
Yeah,
I
just
say,
before we go to the panel. Yeah.
and not that I disagree with you, well, I may do a little bit, but I agree with where you see it, but you seem to be taking two ends of the spectrum. And what I see sometimes with the students who come to the IT, some of them, it's almost so they are there because they have to be there, because they're seen to be, need to be there, their parents think they should be there, society tells them they should be there, but really they actually would prefer to be driving a tractor. And there's nothing, to be honest with you, the people local to me, I live in a rural Meath, people driving a tractor are incredibly happy, and they're very successful, you know, and they've no real interest in going on to third level. And sometimes what I have seen is the fact that some who have gone on to third level have pulled out after a year, because they realise, hold on a minute, this isn't for me. And aren't they the smart ones? Because they know that, you mean, we can't, I think it's 85% of our kids now are going to college. I would question that. When I went through millions of years ago, there was only 15%. And often it was due to the location or whether you were wealthy enough, because we had to pay. You know, so it was a different scenario. So I think we do have to question, you know, what other alternatives are there for people? And I think something like the apprenticeship courses that are coming in, you know, I think that's quite exciting, because there are other methods of education, and also what do we mean by education? You know, and it isn't just about university, and certainly not just about Trinity or the top 10 or whatever it may be, you know.
Okay, and let's just hold that thought for a moment. If we can just get the panel to maybe sit at the front here. And remember, in all these, just remember the one salient point that certainly struck me. Terry has 10 million.
So she can sit in the middle.
So just remember that. And while people are getting set up, and maybe we've talked about what is the measure of success, and I know we have a colleague here from Careers, and from the Careers Office, sometimes their measure of success is that a student will decide to leave the institute, which kind of ties in with what you were saying. Now, I'm sure our retention, or maybe not our retention officer, or finance officer might have a different view of success. But, okay, so we have the panel here, so shoot. No, Are we okay without microphones? Because if anyone is having difficulty hearing, then we'll get a roving mic. Are we okay with microphones?
without.
Yes,
without, okay. Keep going, you were doing well, so keep going. Questions, comments?
Just two things about, firstly, the Generation Z conversation. Sorry, I forget your name. David kind of touched on it at the end. Throughout the last couple of days, and came back up with the digital immigrants and natives, I think what we tend to do is it's useful to have a box just to put people in, but just to reflect upon and look at to start a conversation. But as we were talking about Generation Z over the last couple of days, I was thinking, okay, so at what point, at what age do they then become individuals and not in a box? So is that the Generation Z until they graduate and then we stop looking at everybody as this homogenous group of people that all have the same attributes. And once they graduate, they get their own jobs, run their own lives, and everybody's then unique and different. So I think we have to be careful that the same thing happened with the digital natives and immigrants debate, where suddenly everybody was either an immigrant or a native, and then after a few years we realised we got that completely wrong. They're not based on their age, immigrants or natives. It's actually access to technology, all that sort of stuff. So I think we have to keep that in mind. And then second, the point about your check, so we'll talk later.
I'm sure we all want to.
I do think that the most important thing we can do in terms of students, whether we call them Generation Z or not, is focus on digital literacy. Because I think that the technologies will change, but if we can help students to navigate their way through they have access to more information than we ever did. And it's about finding the right information, evaluating in terms of bias, quality, being able to use it in useful ways. I think if we reduce it to a set of skills that students can then use all of this data and information that's at their fingertips, and it doesn't matter so much about the channel that they find that information on, whether that be YouTube or Wikipedia. They can go to Wikipedia and if they can figure out, well, look, that's useful information, I can kind of cross-reference that and deem it to be true, or at least of good quality, but I think then we'd have them in good stead. I think that digital literacy thing is one of the most important things.
Okay, well, Kevin would like to respond to that. I'm going to come back to you then, David. And
again, on the digital literacy, and I totally agree, but I guess that is in a sense assuming that we are digitally literate ourselves and can help them to do that. And I mean, there is a big question over that, and there's a big fear, and there's a whole, I guess it's not necessarily something that as institutions at higher ed, and I know the National Forum is doing work to counteract this, but that we just can't assume that everybody who's teaching even understands the possibilities. Well, most of us are very happy in our box kind of teaching a subject and saying, actually, and I still get this, like the digital thing has nothing to do with my subject. Okay, the students can look at Wikipedia if they like or whatever, but here's my lecture, here's my, and the notion that we ourselves need to be educated into, and not just the lecturers, but our management, our presidents actually, it's quite often some of the statistics talking about in education, but also in wider industry, are saying that most companies, most organizations know that there is an issue around this digital thing, but actually very few are doing anything about it. It is kind of a wait and see approach. And as I say, quite often we wait until there's a problem. That's again the culture of higher education. We wait and then we react to a problem when it arises. We don't really forward thinking. So I'd love to see it. One thing I've been arguing for is actually having a whole program of digital skills coaching that is kind of going to go right across for our staff, for our students. And actually that notion of, actually no, we're not all knowing, and we can actually sit in a room with our students and learn these kind of skills, not just how to do things, but actually, as you say, the critical part of it from kind of within our organisation and indeed from outside. So that's just a hugely important thing. And trying to convince people to even put money into this, maybe some of the 10 million might go towards it, I don't know. So.
Yeah. And before we get on to Generation Z, Terry, do you want to talk a bit about that digital literacy?
Yeah, I suppose. I think what's actually, and I think the way that the forum is thinking just now is what's actually needed. I think is that when we're designing our programs and you talked about graduate attributes and employability and everything, right? But we're deciding them from our space, from our own particular lens. So there's a piece of work, I think, that requires us to build the sort of capacity and a different view from those that are designing the programs to enable them to actually more effectively integrate and design in the development of digital skills.